The dark space shattered, and the fragments of space turned into a torrent, rushing through the void in the place where the collapse and fragmentation occurred. A figure stepped into the air, and wherever it passed, the torrents automatically parted, as if they dared not touch such an existence. In the Heavenly Emperor Mausoleum, many top-tier powerhouses were also staring dumbfounded at the figure radiating endless mysterious spiritual energy. After all, the Tianluo continent was one of the supercontinents in the Great Thousand Worlds, so news here spread quickly. The powerhouses present recognized the identity of the newcomer at once. The mysterious spiritual energy, capable of perfectly transitioning between ice, fire, thunder, and darkness, could only be achieved by one person in the entire Great Thousand Worlds. That person was the Martial Realm Master, the renowned figure who was also famous throughout the Great Thousand Worlds, the Martial Ancestor, in the Great Thousand Worlds. The Heavenly Supreme is the most supreme, but among them, there are still differences in rank. Looking at the present era, among the many peak existences that shine in the Great Thousand Worlds, the most unique are the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor, who are undoubtedly two of the most prominent. They both came from the lower dimensions, yet both possessed astonishingly exceptional talents. The Flame Emperor had already stated that, in just a few hundred years, he had created the boundless fire domain, mastering the art of flame control, which stood unparalleled in the world. He had also perfected alchemy, surpassing even the ancient alchemy sects in the Great Thousand Worlds. Nowadays, everyone knows that the most reliable medicines come from the boundless fire domain, in contrast to the carefree Flame Emperor. The Martial Ancestor was far more reserved and steady, yet even so, when he once ventured alone into the Ice Spirit clan to save his beloved wife, he single-handedly withstood the full force of the Ice Spirit clan. And one should know that ancient clans like the Ice Spirit clan, although somewhat declining, still possessed an incredibly strong foundation. Even a Heavenly Supreme would find it difficult to cause trouble within the Ice Spirit clan without facing dire consequences. Moreover, such ancient clans have vast networks of connections, and once they call for help, powerful forces would gather. That time, the Ice Spirit clan indeed did this. They summoned many formidable beings from across the Great Thousand Worlds to exert pressure on the Martial Ancestor and force him to withdraw. It is said that at that time, 3 Heavenly Supremes from the Ice Spirit clan were present. Such a lineup, not to mention dealing with a single person, could easily wipe out an entire ancient clan. The confrontation at that time truly shocked the entire Great Thousand World. However, what was surprising and astonishing was that, despite the overwhelming might of the Ice Spirit clan, the Martial Ancestor did not retreat. It is rumored that he single-handedly resisted the 3 Heavenly Supremes. That battle was earth-shattering, and the entire Great Thousand World was watching in awe. The final outcome remains unsaid, but it was clear that the Martial Ancestor obtained what he wanted from the Ice Spirit clan. From that moment on, his fame spread across the Great Thousand Worlds, and it was then that he established the Martial Realm. Afterward, the Martial Realm grew and became a true superpower in the Great Thousand World. This time, the Ice Spirit clan's leader suddenly abdicated, and the successor was a member of the Ice Spirit clan, who was also the mistress of the Martial Realm. Since then, the relationship between the Ice Spirit clan and the Martial Realm became very close. With the strength of the Martial Realm, the Ice Spirit clan had shed its signs of decline, growing stronger and stronger, and now ranked among the top ancient clans, which made many other ancient clans envious. All of this was undoubtedly thanks to the Martial Ancestor. As a result, both the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor became dazzling figures. However, the Boundless Fire Domain and the Martial Realm were both located on the edges of the Great Thousand World, one in the south and one in the north, keeping a watchful eye on the extraterritorial clans who were ever present, eyeing the Great Thousand World. So, although these two figures were equally famous throughout the Great Thousand World, they rarely appeared at the same occasion. However, today, both of them appeared together, which naturally stunned and delighted the top-tier powerhouses present. Is that the Martial Ancestor? Amidst the astonished gazes, Chen also curiously cast his eyes toward the figure. He saw that the person in the void was surrounded by constantly shifting spiritual energy, and his aura was as deep and towering as a mountain, as though nothing in the world could shake him. Compared to the carefree and free-spirited Flame Emperor, this martial ancestor was clearly more stable and composed like a mountain. But, like the Flame Emperor, the aura emanating from the martial ancestor's body also caused the entire world to tremble, as though it could not bear such a presence. Dad! Dad! Amidst the many awestruck gazes, Lin Jing happily waved her small hand, smiling as she called out. The martial ancestor's gaze shifted towards her, and as he looked at Lin Jing, his stern face quickly softened. He then took a step forward, instantly traversing space and appearing before Lin Jing. You've run off again without permission. Looks like I'll have to ground you this time. The martial ancestor said sternly, his voice heavy. However, facing his serious expression, Lin Jing still smiled mischievously and immediately walked up to him, hugging his arm with an unconcerned look on her face. This caused the martial ancestor's stern demeanor to last only for a few moments before turning into helplessness. He clearly knew that his strict fatherly attitude had no effect on his daughter. The martial ancestor's gaze shifted towards Mu Chun, and a smile appeared on his face. Young friend Mu Chun, thank you for protecting my daughter earlier. Mu Chun felt somewhat embarrassed. Had he known that the two young ladies were being watched by their father, he wouldn't have gone overboard trying to be the hero. Seeing Mu Chin's awkward expression, the martial ancestor seemed to understand his thoughts. He shook his head and said, "This wasn't a futile effort, in that moment. Even we couldn't have stopped it instantly. And with their strength, they would definitely be unable to resist the Demon Emperor's might. So, the thanks are truly warranted." Is that so? Mu Chin responded with a dry laugh, scratching his head. Hee, Lin brother speaks the truth. A voice of laughter rang out, and the Flame Emperor appeared before them. He patted Mu Chin's shoulder, then turned to the martial ancestor and smiled. Lin brother, it's been many years. I hope all is well. In this great thousand world, few could earn the Flame Emperor's respect, and the martial ancestor was one of them. However, over the years, both had been preoccupied with holding back the extraterritorial clans, so their meetings had become rare. Yet, there was a mutual understanding between them, as they both shared the same sentiment. Brother Xiao. In response to the Flame Emperor's politeness, the martial ancestor also cupped his fists. He then raised his palm, and within it was a blue light orb, inside which was sealed a hideous demonic-faced, faint yet terrifying aura of evil emanated from it. This guy is rather strange, the Flame Emperor observed, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the sealed devouring Demon Emperor. This devouring Demon Emperor is indeed no simple foe. The martial ancestor smiled slightly. In the ancient times, within the extraterritorial clans, he would have ranked among the top 10. The Flame Emperor was somewhat surprised. To be ranked among the top 10 in the extraterritorial clans was a massive threat, even to them. However, from the strength the devouring Demon Emperor had shown earlier, it didn't seem to justify such a position, even though his current state wasn't optimal. In ancient times, this devouring Demon Emperor had another title. The martial ancestor paused before continuing. That was the Nine Corpses Demon Emperor. The Nine Corpses Demon Emperor. Mu Chun and the others were stunned, murmuring in confusion that it was the Flame Emperor who seemed to have some insight into this. In a certain sense, the devouring Demon Emperor wasn't just one person, but 9. And they were 9 Demon Emperors. The martial ancestor focused on the blue orb in his hand and said slowly, "The devouring Demon Emperor came from the extraterritorial clan known as the Swallowing Demon Clan. In the past, this clan had 9 Demon Emperors. They sought the ultimate power, combining the 9 into one, becoming an existence of terrifying strength." Mu Chin was shocked. If that was the case, then during the assault on the ancient Heavenly Palace, the Heavenly Emperor didn't face just one Demon Emperor, but 9 Demon Emperors. If it were just one, how could the devouring Demon Emperor have opposed the Heavenly Emperor, who had cultivated 1 Qi transforms 3 purities? The martial ancestor smiled and said, "At that time, the Heavenly Emperor used 1 Qi transforms 3 purities to destroy 7 of the demons. However, he eventually ran out of energy and could only seal the remaining 2 demons. The demon heart that the Flame Emperor sensed earlier had shattered because the devouring demon emperor detonated the 8th demon, which allowed him to escape. Chen and the others were stunned, realizing just how terrifying the extraterritorial clans were. They could use such strange methods to create such a horrifying existence. No wonder even the Heavenly Emperor was forced to seal him away in the end. From this, it was also clear how powerful the Heavenly Emperor was. Facing the 9-in-1 Super Demon Emperors, not only could he destroy 7 of them, but he also sealed away the remaining 2. The Heavenly Emperor's name was truly well earned. I see. The Flame Emperor nodded, his expression becoming more serious. He knew that even he would have to be cautious when facing such a bizarre Super Demon Emperor. No wonder the 9 Corpses Demon Emperor had once been ranked among the top 10 of the extraterritorial clans. Such a figure certainly cannot be allowed to escape. The martial ancestor nodded, then smiled. But this one's fate is sealed. With both of us taking action, there's no way he'll remain free. The words of the martial ancestor were calm, but within them, there was an undeniable aura of dominance. They asked for this overwhelming display of power. Chen and the others took it as a matter of course. Not to mention that the current state of the devouring demon emperor was pitiful. Even if he were to fully recover and return to his former form as the 9-corpse demon emperor, if he were to clash with the 2 in front of them, he would still meet a tragic end filled with hatred. However, the one who truly deserves the credit for slaying this demon is the Heavenly Emperor. He should be here today to personally witness its eradication, said the Flame Emperor with a slight smile. The martial ancestor nodded lightly upon hearing this. At the same time, Chen and Mandala couldn't help but feel a shock in their hearts. From their conversation, did this mean the Heavenly Emperor hadn't truly fallen? Hasn't the Heavenly Emperor already fallen? When the Flame Emperor finished speaking, both Chen and Mandala were stunned, and the latter couldn't contain her emotions, asking excitedly. The Flame Emperor and the martial ancestor exchanged a glance before the former responded. The Heavenly Emperor indeed perished, but his traces remain, guarding the seal. Mandala's face immediately dimmed upon hearing this, clearly saddened. After all, the Heavenly Emperor had once shown her great favor, like a father and brother to her. The Flame Emperor, noticing her expression, understood that she had a connection with the Heavenly Emperor but chose not to elaborate further. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the plaza inside the mountain, where a massive black head lay. Is that the form the Heavenly Emperor took? Chen asked in surprise as he followed the Flame Emperor's gaze. They had initially thought that the black head belonged to the Demon Emperor, but no one had expected it to actually be the Heavenly Emperor's manifestation, and the Demon Emperor had taken this form instead. The Flame Emperor nodded. The devouring Demon Emperor is incredibly cunning. Not only did he transform himself into the Heavenly Emperor's appearance, but he also turned the remains of the Heavenly Emperor into this form, attempting to mislead others into destroying it. With a wave of his sleeve, the Flame Emperor unleashed a brilliant flame that engulfed the black head. The flames blazed, and the black head rapidly melted, with strands of demonic aura evaporating. As the head melted, it transformed into a crystal-like glow, which gradually gathered into a shadowy figure. The figure wore a white robe, exuding a graceful and composed demeanor. Faintly, there was a pressure that could not be described, akin to the majesty of an emperor, invoking both reverence and awe. The top-tier beings in the world also gazed at this figure with awe in their eyes, some curiosity on their faces. This was the creator of the ancient heavenly palace. Could it be the legendary Heavenly Emperor? I never thought that despite sacrificing himself to seal the demon, the task still wasn't completed. Instead, it would require the help of future generations, and that brings a sense of shame. The white-robed figure materialized, his gaze focused on the cyan light orb in the martial ancestor's hand, and he sighed. Your senior's righteousness is something we, the younger generation, must repay. We should assist you. Chen and the others responded, with respect in their voices as they clasped their fists. Even figures like the Flame Emperor and martial ancestor, known as peerless geniuses, stood in reverence. This was the Heavenly Emperor, who had once sealed away a great demon for the sake of the entire world. Despite being figures of exceptional talent, They were willing to show respect for someone who had sacrificed so much for the greater good. Chen and the others bowed in gratitude, honoring the Heavenly Emperor for his past protection of the Great Thousand Worlds. The Heavenly Emperor gazed at them, his expression filled with reassurance. His eyes swept over the Flame Emperor and the Martial Ancestor, and he said, "Back then, many top-tier experts fell in the battle against the extraterritorial clans. The Great Thousand Worlds suffered tremendous losses. But to see such remarkable individuals rise up after thousands of years, it seems that the fate of the Great Thousand Worlds is not yet finished." Although the Heavenly Emperor was now but a lingering shadow, his insight was still extraordinary. He could clearly see the depth of the two in front of him. Based on his estimate, even at his peak, he might not have been able to defeat them. This realization filled him with both emotion and relief. Despite the great calamity the world had faced, it had not fallen but instead flourished even more. The Flame Emperor and the Martial Ancestor humbly acknowledged this, before handing over the light orb that sealed the devouring Demon Emperor. Clearly, they intended for the Heavenly Emperor to deal with this former great enemy. The Heavenly Emperor reached out and took the orb, giving it a gentle flick. Immediately, the fierce visage of the devouring Demon Emperor appeared, his malevolent eyes glaring at the Heavenly Emperor as he snarled, "Heavenly Emperor, our battle was one you would have lost, had no one else intervened." The Heavenly Emperor smiled faintly, unperturbed. "That is not the case. You, the entire devouring demon clan, gathered all your strength to create such a being. You were once a top figure among the extraterritorial clans. Had I allowed you to leave back then, other regions of the Great Thousand Worlds would have suffered immense pressure. The fact that I managed to seal you for all this time proves that my goal has been achieved. Look at this world now," the Heavenly Emperor continued, his voice full of quiet pride. "The Great Thousand Worlds still stand, and great individuals are emerging. Therefore, it is not I who lost." The devouring Demon Emperor's expression darkened as he heard the words, his demonic aura surging violently. His demonic face seemed ready to roar and break free, but it was bound tightly by layers of azure light. Unable to escape even the slightest bit, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor exchanged a glance, but said nothing. Clearly, the Heavenly Emperor was unaware that, during the Great Calamity many years ago, although the Great Thousand Worlds had managed to fend off the invasion, almost half of the territory had been occupied by the extraterritorial clan. Over these thousands of years, the extraterritorial clan still kept a watchful eye, continuously attempting to fully conquer the Great Thousand Worlds. Thus, when reflecting on that great calamity, the Great Thousand Worlds hadn't truly been at its peak, that it could only be said that it barely survived at an enormous cost. They all knew that the extraterritorial clan would never give up easily. When they returned once again, it would surely bring forth a devastating force. However, thinking of this, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor both smiled faintly. They had not yet arrived at the Great Thousand Worlds during that great calamity, but now that they had encountered the situation, they were eager to see what kind of power the extraterritorial clan would wield this time. The Heavenly Emperor glanced at the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor, then smiled and turned his gaze toward the small figure standing behind them, his eyes filled with a sense of deep relief. "Mandala, it's so good to see you safe and sound." Mandala stared at the Heavenly Emperor, her eyes suddenly reddening as her emotions reached a peak. She walked forward step by step, extending her small hand to hold the Heavenly Emperor's. The Heavenly Emperor gently patted her head, as though tenderly caressing a flower on the verge of wilting. The Heavenly Emperor smiled slightly at Mandala before looking toward Chen, who was holding the Heavenly Emperor's sword. That he studied him carefully from head to toe, and said, "Many of the most outstanding talents from my ancient heavenly palace couldn't cultivate the immortal golden body that I never expected to meet someone who has achieved it today. Truly, heaven does not forsake me." Chen solemnly bowed to the Heavenly Emperor and replied, "I was fortunate enough to inherit the method left by Xun'er and successfully cultivate the immortal golden body. I will never forget this great kindness. Had it not been for the Heavenly Emperor's method of cultivating the immortal golden body, Chen would have been lost, uncertain how much time he would have wasted trying to find a way to achieve it." The Heavenly Emperor smiled and nodded, Accepting Mu Chen's bow, he then extended his hand and said with a smile, "Young friend, may I borrow the Heavenly Emperor's sword?" Mu Chen quickly handed the Heavenly Emperor's sword with both hands. The Heavenly Emperor took the sword, made a single-handed seal, and then cast a cold gaze upon the sealed devouring demon emperor. Sensing the impending destruction, the devouring demon emperor began to roar furiously, showing signs of panic and fear. Yet, the Heavenly Emperor remained indifferent. The Heavenly Emperor's sword in his hand shot out violently, transforming into billions of stars, each one containing an overwhelmingly terrifying power. At present, the Heavenly Emperor was merely a remnant of a spiritual shadow, so his own power was insufficient to destroy the devouring demon emperor. Therefore, he had to rely on the Heavenly Emperor's sword's strength. The billions of stars pierced through the azure light, instantly tearing apart the demonic face sealed within. A faintly sorrowful roar echoed across the heavens and earth. "You should not get too pleased with yourselves. Last time, the extraterritorial clan didn't even use all their strength. When they return next time, it will be the end of your great 1,000 worlds." The roar reverberated across the skies as the devouring demon emperor, sealed within, was completely stripped of all life force, turning into nothingness, vanishing from the world. Buzz. At the moment the devouring demon emperor was destroyed, a shadow of light suddenly shot out from the edge of the Heavenly Emperor mausoleum, attempting to escape. However, just as it tried to flee, a familiar, cold voice descended from the heavens. "You beast, it was bad enough you fled the battle back then, but now you even conspired with that demon, trying to help him escape the seal. Truly, you are guilty beyond redemption." The indifferent voice descended, causing Lu Heng to be so terrified that his soul almost left his body. Without hesitation, his demonic aura erupted, and he transformed into a massive flood dragon, his body now a demon flood dragon due to the demonic corruption. His original form was that of an ancient blood flood dragon, but now he had been corrupted into a demon flood dragon. As he transformed, Lu Heng swung his dragon tail, shattering the space around him in an attempt to escape. Whoosh! But at that moment, a crystalline beam of light descended from the heavens, sharp sword chi cutting through the world. An ancient crystal sword fell down, piercing through the demon flood dragon's head, nailing it to the ground. The overwhelming sword chi erupted, and before Lu Heng could beg for mercy, his massive body was pulverized into a heap of flesh and blood, his divine soul destroyed in the process. The Heavenly Emperor was clearly enraged by Lu Heng's betrayal. Without hesitation, he struck, showing no mercy. Although destroying the devouring demon emperor might have been tricky, dealing with Lu Heng, a mere Upper Earth Supreme, was a simple matter. Lu Heng had no power to resist and was instantly killed. After dealing with the situation, the Heavenly Emperor looked up and gave a faint smile to the many top-tier powerhouses around him. "The matter is now settled. You may all leave." As his words echoed, the space around them began to fluctuate, opening a spatial passage beside the powerful figures. The many top-tier powerhouses exchanged glances. They had stayed, clearly still eyeing the Heavenly Emperor's legacy and the one chi transforms 3 purities. However, now that the Heavenly Emperor had spoken, they had no choice but to leave. Furthermore, with the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor present, those treasures were clearly not meant for them. With a sigh of regret, they turned and stepped into the spatial passage, disappearing swiftly. With their departure, the Heavenly Emperor mausoleum became peaceful once more. The Heavenly Emperor, seeing this, turned his gaze toward the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor, smiling slightly. "Might you two have an interest in my one chi transforms 3 purities?" The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor paused slightly upon hearing the Heavenly Emperor's words, then exchanged a glance before chuckling. Although the Heavenly Emperor had been a renowned peak powerhouse in ancient times, and the one chi transforms 3 purities was one of the most extraordinary divine abilities, with immeasurable power, it would have been highly coveted by any ordinary Heavenly Supreme. However, these two were not ordinary individuals. Their ambitions were as high as the heavens themselves. While the one chi transforms 3 purities was undoubtedly powerful, it was not something that would make them covetous. They were confident that the techniques they had learned and created were no weaker than the one Qi transforms three purities. Moreover, if they were to truly cultivate the Heavenly Emperor's one Qi transforms three purities, it would mean accepting the Heavenly Emperor's legacy and guidance, which would be difficult for their pride to accept. They respected the Heavenly Emperor's great righteousness, but they did not wish to inherit his legacy. Furthermore, with younger generations still present, it would be somewhat laughable for them to compete with the younger ones for the legacy. So, in response to the Heavenly Emperor's words, the two smiled and said, "Such opportunities are best left for those fated." The Heavenly Emperor nodded with a smile, clearly not surprised. The two before him were extraordinary beings, and even at his peak, he might not have been able to defeat them. Therefore, he had suspected they would not covet his one Qi transforms three purities. His earlier words had been a subtle test. It seemed there were other candidates for his legacy, more suitable than the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor. He then shifted his gaze to the silent Mu Chen, smiling. "And what about you?" Mu Chen was taken aback when the Heavenly Emperor suddenly turned his gaze toward him. Previously, he had thought the Heavenly Emperor would pass on the one Qi transforms three purities to the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor. While he was somewhat disappointed, he wasn't overly covetous. His cultivation of the immortal golden body during this trip to the ancient heavenly palace had already been a great achievement, and he was quite satisfied. He hadn't been thinking about anything more. But to his surprise, both the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor had declined, and the Heavenly Emperor was now looking at him, with a gaze filled with admiration. It was clear the Heavenly Emperor was fond of him, especially because of his cultivation of the immortal golden body. Beside him, the Nine Nether quickly nudged Mu Chen, urging him silently. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If he could truly acquire the one Qi transforms three purities, the benefits to him would be immeasurable. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Mu Chen didn't put on any pretensions. He nodded sincerely and said, "I've long heard of the legendary name of one Qi transforms three purities, and I've always yearned for it. However, I fear I lack the talent and fortune to learn it." The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor, seeing this, nodded slightly. With their status, they could easily decline the one Qi transforms three purities without anyone questioning them. After all, they had the qualifications to do so. If Mu Chen had behaved as they did, it would have seemed pretentious. Such an extraordinary divine ability would make even the superpowers eager, not to mention someone like Mu Chen. So, Mu Chen's honest admission now appeared genuine. "Haha, well, you're an honest young one," the Heavenly Emperor said, laughing and nodding in approval. Clearly, he was very pleased with Mu Chen's response. "You've cultivated the immortal golden body, which shows we have a connection. To prevent this extraordinary divine ability from fading with me, I will pass it on to you today." Hearing this, even with Mu Chen's composure, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. But he didn't speak further. He simply gave the Heavenly Emperor a respectful bow. "The Heavenly Emperor has found a worthy successor. How fortunate," said the Flame Emperor with a smile as he saw the Heavenly Emperor preparing to pass down the one Qi transforms three purities technique to Mu Chen. He was quite pleased with Mu Chen, and it seemed his daughter had a good eye for people. "The Demon Emperor is gone, and we should not linger any longer." Both the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor spoke at the same time, sensing that with the Heavenly Emperor preparing to pass on an unparalleled divine ability to Mu Chen, they were no longer needed. The Heavenly Emperor cupped his fists towards them and said, "The extraterritorial clan still harbors ill intentions and seeks to destroy our great thousand worlds. In the future, I hope you too will stay vigilant." The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor nodded gravely. The extraterritorial clan was now their great enemy, and they would certainly remain alert to prevent any resurgence. The Flame Emperor turned his gaze to Mu Chen and smiled gently. With a flick of his sleeve, an ancient lamp flew toward Mu Chen. Mu Chen immediately caught it. "Mu Chen, young friend, thank you for saving my daughter. If you ever face danger and need assistance from my boundless fire domain, simply light this lamp, and I will come to your aid." The Flame Emperor said with a smile. Mu Chen was startled upon hearing this. This was no ordinary gift. With this lamp in hand, It was like having the power to summon a peak powerhouse from the great thousand worlds to his AID.IT was truly a life-saving treasure, invaluable beyond description. After all, in the great thousand worlds, treasures that could summon someone like the Flame Emperor were highly coveted, and many factions would spare no effort to obtain such a thing. While Mu Chen was still amazed, Martial Ancestor also chuckled and said, "Since Brother Xiao has made such an offer, if I don't show some gesture, I fear I will never hear the end of it from my daughter." As he spoke, Martial Ancestor snapped his fingers, and a stone talisman flew toward Mu Chen. "This item is similar to that lamp. If you crush it, I will sense it." Mu Chen caught the stone talisman and lamp, pausing for a moment before bowing respectfully to the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor. "I will never forget your protection, my esteemed seniors." With his keen mind, Mu Chen understood that the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor were offering him support. After all, the road of the strong was full of thorns, with countless tribulations, and many of the world's chosen ones perished along the way. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor clearly cared for his potential and didn't want him to fall before his time. This kindness was not something to be taken lightly. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor were slightly surprised. They hadn't expected Mu Chen to understand the deeper meaning of their actions. They exchanged a smile. This young man was indeed astute and perceptive, and they believed he would undoubtedly achieve greatness in the future. Having gone through much in their own lives, both the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor never underestimated the younger generation. Despite their lofty positions in the great thousand worlds, they recognized Mu Chen's extraordinary potential and were happy to forge a good relationship with him. "Mu Chen, if you have the chance, come visit me in the martial realm," Lin Jing said, clearly reluctant to part ways. With her father here, she clearly had to return with him. "Don't worry, I'll make sure to collect that debt from the Great Xia dynasty and send it to you," she added, not forgetting to mention her promise about the debt, even at a time like this. "I'll be breaking through to the Earth Supreme soon. Next time we meet, you'd better not be left behind." Xiao Xiao also smiled, her delicate features turning a bit enchanting as she grinned. Mu Chen nodded with a smile, telling both women to take care. After bidding their farewells, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor didn't linger. They took Xiao Xiao and Lin Jing with them and vanished into the sky in an instant. Leaving the Heavenly Emperor Mausoleum behind, Mu Chen watched the dignified figures of the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor disappear, feeling a sense of admiration. That was the true essence of a world-shaking powerhouse, someone who could reverse the tide even when the heavens were against them. The great thousand worlds are protected by such figures. Even if the extraterritorial clan returns, we should be able to fight them, the Heavenly Emperor said with a sigh before turning his gaze to Mu Chen. The One Qi transforms three purities technique must be passed on through the true spirit baptism. This way, not only will you gain the cultivation method, but you will also receive my cultivation experience, enabling you to cultivate it as quickly as possible. The true spirit baptism was particularly beneficial for Mu Chen, but the process would cause significant harm to the one performing the baptism. However, since the Heavenly Emperor had already fallen, such a cost was no longer a concern for him. Mu Chen, feeling a sense of gratitude, nodded lightly. However, once you have cultivated the One Qi transforms three purities technique, the body you create will have the same strength as your original body, and it will still possess the potential for further evolution. So, I suggest that you wait until you break through to the Earth Supreme before practicing the One Qi transforms three purities technique. That way, your avatar will also possess Earth Supreme power. Mu Chen was also deeply shaken upon hearing this. The One Qi transforms three purities technique, in a certain sense, resembled a kind of avatar technique. However, this technique was far more profound. The avatars it created not only possessed all of their creator's strength, but they could also continue to cultivate and grow, offering immense potential. In a wonder, the Heavenly Emperor was able to single-handedly stand against the Super Demon Emperor, formed by the fusion of 9 Demon Emperors. However, although Mu Chen was now at the pinnacle of the 9-grade Supreme stage, just one step away from reaching the Earth Supreme realm, this seemingly small step was enough to cause countless geniuses to stagnate for their entire lives. Even though Mu Chun had confidence in his own talent, he estimated that if he followed the normal cultivation path, it would take a long time to break through. The Heavenly Emperor could see Mu Chen's thoughts reflected in his expression that he smiled faintly, gazing at the Heavenly Emperor's sword in his hand. Since you are my successor, I will naturally ensure you have the best opportunities. Your talent is exceptional, and your foundation is solid. Your spiritual energy is stable. I can use the Heavenly Emperor's sword to guide you, granting you a baptism, and with the sword's power, help you break through to the Earth's supreme realm. But if that happens, the Heavenly Emperor's sword will lose its brilliance. At this point, the Heavenly Emperor's tone carried a slight hint of regret. Mu Chun felt a mix of emotions in his heart upon hearing this. The power and rarity of the Heavenly Emperor's sword went without saying. Even high-level sacred artifacts couldn't compare. The existence of a Heavenly Supreme would be tempted by its allure. Now, using it as a sacrifice to help him break through was an incredible favor. Do not refuse if you can eventually reach the Heavenly Supreme realm. Perhaps the Heavenly Emperor's sword will regain its former glory if the great thousand worlds face calamity again in the future. Use it to eliminate the demons in my place, the Heavenly Emperor said, his gaze softening as he looked at Mu Chun. Mu Chun met the Heavenly Emperor's smile, and finally, he had no words to say. He could only bow deeply, a gesture that clearly showed his respect as a disciple. Disciple obeys. The Heavenly Emperor smiled faintly at Mu Chen's formal salute and did not avoid it. If the ancient Heavenly Palace had not been destroyed, many exceptional disciples would have yearned for such an opportunity, but they never obtained the right timing. As for Mu Chun, his fate was undeniably profound. Follow me, the Heavenly Emperor said. With a flick of his sleeve, the surrounding space distorted. By the time Mu Chun and the others realized what had happened, they were already high above a vast river. The water below was churning, making a thunderous sound, while spiritual mist rose like a tangible form, shaping into dragons, phoenixes, tigers, and leopards. This was the Heavenly River, the very one they had visited earlier. However, when they left, the Heavenly River had closed once again. To their surprise, the Heavenly Emperor could easily open it once more. The spiritual energy here was incredibly rich, a true cultivation paradise. If one were to cultivate here, their progress would be swift. You may also cultivate here for a while, the Heavenly Emperor said, looking at Nine Nether. Nine Nether had already reached the 9-grade Supreme stage, and was also just one step away from the Earth's Supreme realm. However, the Heavenly Emperor's true spirit baptism could only assist one person. Thus, he could not help Nine Nether break through simultaneously, but could allow her to cultivate here, speeding up her accumulation of energy for a future breakthrough. Thank you, Heavenly Emperor, Nine Nether said with a hint of joy on her delicate face. Cultivating in such a blessed place would certainly bring her great benefits. As for Mandala, you've already reached the perfect Earth Supreme, so this place will offer you little in terms of improvement. If you're bored, feel free to visit the Scripture Pavilion. The Heavenly Emperor smiled at Mandala. Mandala gently shook her head. The Heavenly Emperor before her was the last remaining spirit of the ancient Heavenly Palace. If he vanished, he would be gone from the world forever. Right now, she only wanted to stay by his side. Silly girl, the Heavenly Emperor sighed lightly when he saw her expression. He had raised Mandala for many years and treated her like a daughter. Their bond was deep. Otherwise, he wouldn't have forcefully sealed her to protect her from a great calamity. After comforting Mandala, the Heavenly Emperor turned his gaze back to Mu Chun, his expression becoming solemn. It's time to begin. His spiritual form had limited time, so no further delay was allowed. Mu Chun solemnly agreed. The Heavenly Emperor flicked his fingers, and the Heavenly River's water churned. It directly condensed into a water lotus on the river's surface, and Mu Chun sat cross-legged upon it. The Heavenly Emperor stood before Mu Chun, his expression solemn. His fingers were curled together. In the next instant, they pointed sharply, and endless spiritual light shimmered from his fingers, as if filled with vitality, radiating a powerful life force. Hiss. The single point of his finger seemed to disregard the distance and space, piercing through the void and gently touching the center of Mu Chen's forehead. Buzz. The spiritual light instantly spread from Mu Chen's forehead. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped his entire body. The sparkling light seemed to pierce through Mu Chen's forehead, penetrating into his mind at a this moment. Mu Chen's body began to tremble violently. He felt a massive flood of information, like an ocean, rushing madly into his mind. The size of the information was so vast that it almost caused his mind to explode. Fortunately, through sheer resilience, he managed to endure it. But even so, veins like worms crawled across his once handsome face, making him appear extremely grotesque. As Mu Chen endured the excruciating pain, suddenly a ray of spiritual light gathered deep within his mind, forming ancient characters. 1 Qi transforms 3 purities. The words of spiritual light gathered and scattered, followed by the flow of a mysterious and profound mental formula that it also contained the vast cultivation experience and insights that the Heavenly Emperor had gained during his own practice. Mu Chen's heart was almost immediately immersed in the mysterious formula and insights. Such an esoteric divine art was something he had never seen before. This divine ability, unparalleled in the world, had extremely harsh requirements for talent. Luckily, Mu Chen was extraordinary himself, and with the Heavenly Emperor's true spirit baptism, along with his life's experiences and insights, he was able to grasp it. Otherwise, even if Mu Chen had obtained the cultivation method, he might have been unable to comprehend its intricacies, left to only look up in awe. Now, with the Heavenly Emperor's guidance, it was as if he had received the best possible direction, and many of the profound points he couldn't understand before suddenly became clear to him that he was deeply relieved if it weren't for the Heavenly Emperor's willingness to bestow his true spirit upon him. Given his current strength, even if he had obtained the cultivation method for 1 Qi transforms 3 purities, he would have needed at least several years to even begin to practice. Mu Chen was immersed in the comprehension of 1 Qi transforms 3 purities, as if time had no meaning. In the blink of an eye, it felt like both an instant and the passing of many years. With your current strength, you can only comprehend the profoundness of 1 Qi transforms 3 purities, but cannot truly cultivate it. Therefore, there is no need to expend too much effort at this time. Everything must wait until you break through. Just as Mu Chen was deeply absorbed, a loud voice suddenly echoed in his mind, pulling him out of his trance and causing him to open his eyes wide. Upon opening his eyes, Mu Chen's mind cleared swiftly. He felt the enormous stream of information flowing through his mind and was shocked. This peerless divine art was indeed extraordinary. Just this brief moment of comprehension almost caused him to lose his sense of self and become uncontrollable. If the Heavenly Emperor had not reminded him in time, he might not have known how long he would have been lost in it. Prepare yourself, the Heavenly Emperor's voice echoed, and then he slowly raised the ancient Heavenly Emperor's sword, which seemed as clear as crystal in his hand. His eyes were filled with affection for the sword. This sword had accompanied him through his life, witnessing his journey from an unknown figure to becoming the renowned Heavenly Emperor of the great 1,000 worlds. This final stretch, I hope my old friend can assist me, the Heavenly Emperor whispered. Buzz. The Heavenly Emperor's sword responded, emitting a crisp hum, its blade glowing with endless sword light. However, this light was gentle now, no longer carrying the sharp, killing intent it once had. The Heavenly Emperor smiled faintly, raising his hand, and the Heavenly Emperor's sword shot into the sky. Then, with a twist of his body, it transformed into a colossal pillar of light that stretched across the heavens and the earth for miles. Inside this light was a terrifying, overwhelming power. The Heavenly Emperor beckoned with his finger, and the light within the pillar spilled down like mercury, covering the sky and pouring down upon Mu Chen. Bang! Bang! The endless light contained immense, overwhelming power. The moment it touched Mu Chen's body, it seeped in like mercury, penetrating every pore. The vast power was so domineering that it could hardly be described by the word overbearing. As a result, Mu Chen's body immediately erupted in clouds of blood mist, his form becoming riddled with holes, flesh and blood turning to a pulpy mess. Fortunately, Mu Chen's physical recovery ability was incredibly strong. As golden light surged, the spirit of the true dragon and phoenix continuously moved through his flesh and blood, rapidly restoring his body. When the Heavenly Emperor saw this, he was slightly surprised. Originally, He thought he would need to intervene to help preserve Mu Chen's body. However, he did not expect that Mu Chen could manage it on his own, although it was extremely difficult and came with immense pain. The Heavenly Emperor did not intervene further. This suffering, for Mu Chen, was also a form of trial. After all, even with his help, it was impossible to easily break through to the Earth's supreme realm. Nothing in the world can be achieved without effort. The Heavenly Emperor had already given Mu Chen the greatest opportunity, and whether he could seize this opportunity depended on his own abilities. If everything required the Heavenly Emperor to pave the way, then such a disciple was better off not having. Even if he were to achieve the one Qi transforms 3 purities, he would ultimately be nothing more than an ordinary person. Endless sword light continued to pour down, and Mu Chen's body was continuously exploding. By the end, he was almost unrecognizable, his flesh and blood mangled in a way that made one's eyelids twitch. However, amidst the constant healing, Mu Chen began to sense a peculiar force slowly seeping into his flesh and blood. This power was incredibly mysterious, and though it was only faint, it was refining and strengthening his flesh, bones, and meridians at an astonishing rate. Mu Chen understood that this power must be coming from the Heavenly Emperor's sword. The Heavenly Emperor was using the Heavenly Emperor's sword at the cost of its power to truly reshape Mu Chen's body, strengthening its foundation to prepare for his breakthrough. Mu Chen's body grew stronger under the sword light. He also noticed that the all-pervasive sword light had even infiltrated his supreme C. This realization startled him. If the sword light had even the slightest hint of sharpness, it could shatter his supreme C in an instant. Fortunately, under the guidance of the Heavenly Emperor, the overwhelming sword light was surprisingly gentle. The sword rays continuously drilled into his supreme C, and each ray was like a flood dragon, devouring the spiritual energy within. When it released the energy, it became even more potent and refined. Under the tempering and nurturing of the Heavenly Emperor's sword, Mu Chen could clearly feel that the spiritual energy in his supreme C was rapidly growing at an unimaginable speed. Such a surge was beyond even the potential of refining hundreds of millions of drops of supreme spiritual liquid. Yet under the power of the Heavenly Emperor's sword, it was happening in the blink of an eye. Feeling the explosive growth of spiritual energy within him, Mu Chen gathered his thoughts, striving to maintain a tranquil mind. With this increase, he could already faintly sense that he was on the verge of reaching the limit of the supreme stage. However, even at the cost of the Heavenly Emperor's sword, breaking through to the Earth's supreme realm clearly wouldn't be a simple matter. Thus, in the Heavenly River, half a month passed quietly.